And with that, we will move on to our main topic this week, where we are continuing our review of the Shadowdark role-playing game. We will continue to focus this week on the gameplay section of the book. So Teos, over the weekend, doing his due diligence as requested by our listeners, played another session of the Shadowdark role-playing game.
I,
Teos,
yeah,
tell us all about it.
it was a blast. I played Shadowdark with Meaghan J, and you should absolutely find Meaghan J, who's on our Discord, runs her own Discord, and you can find Meaghan J on Start Playing Games. So Start Playing Games /GM/ Miss MEAGHANJ. Ran a great game. Highly encourage you to sign up for her games. She also runs a lot of free league stuff and other fun things. So I made a character very quickly using Shadowdarklings, which is the official Arcane Library online character creator for Shadowdark. I had a goblin wizard, Wizzywig, who had a dex of 4 and an int of 13. But I survived somehow, hiding behind coffins, really. We played the adventure from Arcane Library for level 4 characters called Eroding Isle of the Executioner. And we had a blast. It really, comes off of this gameplay that we've been talking about and puts it into that larger context of the actual game at hand, right? And so what did I see? One game doesn't tell you everything, right? So I rolled for every spell casting check. I rolled like a 17 or higher.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't fail. I was able to cast this. I cast Magic Missile at a Wraith. I don't know how many times in a row, and I made every check easily. Helped that I get advantage on it, but still, it didn't test that system of, well, I only have a +1 int. What'll happen when I fail my check? How bad will it be? No idea, because I succeeded at every check. What does it matter if I have a dex of 4? I don't know. I hid behind sarcophagi. Nothing ever came up to me and attacked me. But we had a lot of other funny things, like the Wraith drained con. And so I asked, cool, what does that do? And how do you get your con back? And it was like, well, you drained your con, so your con's down, your hit points are down. But how do you get it back? I don't know that it's in the book. Nobody could figure that out. So we just improvised as to when you get it back. And there were a couple of other things like that were just sort of, improvised, right? That whole rulings, not rules kind of mentality. And it didn't damage play in any way, right? It's just sort of, we all agreed that we didn't know and we moved on. What did I love about the gameplay at a high level? And I'll talk about more of this kind of as we go into combat specifically. But that combination that we've covered of being an initiative for exploring means everybody participates. Everybody's taking an equal turn of doing things, even if it's just moving around and showing off new parts of the map. When you go into initiative, then you are doing quick play and in exploring as well. It's all very quick. It drives a fast, continually moving forward game. And if you miss, it's not that big a deal, because it's just sort of the equivalent of an at-will attack. It's a very simple thing, and you move on to your next thing. And I didn't get to test my part of it because I kept making my spell casting check. The fact that it's light like that means that there is very little struggle with complex game rules, right? So even the con drain, make a decision and move on. It's not the end of time. It's not, how does this feat interact with my, I do extra damage when I do ice spells and I have 15 ice features and what, like that kind of thing that you can get into like 4th edition and 5th edition. So, yeah.
Awesome. How long was the session that you played?
We did about 3 hours, and we could have explored some additional rooms, but I think we were kind of all pretty in character to where we decided to say, we would leave. We found our goal. We would leave. We would not go explain the extra rooms and probably died. Plus, the whole setting was like nobody has ever come back alive from this. So we're like, all right, there could be some really bad stuff. Let's just book it and get back out before we die. There were also, I think, 3 wandering encounter rolls, and only one of them triggered, which is in the boat. And I should say that was an interesting thing too, is this scenario starts outdoors and you cross water. So the torch only came into play, once we arrived in the island, because I guess it was nighttime, because we're smart that way. and then inside, right? But otherwise, it was
Mhm.
just sort of outdoor kind of play, right?
Okay. How many players were there?
It was a pretty full party. I think we had 5 players
Okay.
plus our DM. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. Sounds good. It sounds good. It sounds like it backs up sort of what we had been talking about before. And we'll talk more about gameplay right now, and you can add any of the insights that you might have gotten during play. Last time we had started to talk about hiding and sneaking, but we sort of brushed over it really quickly. And I wanted to dig into this a little bit because hiding and sneaking and invisibility and vision and surprise are all related to each other in these fantasy role playing games. And sometimes they are handled with great detail poorly. Sometimes they are handled very with very slight rules poorly. Um, it's hard to handle them well, and conversely, they can be so important because getting surprise in a game or being invisible or hidden in a game can make such a huge difference that I wanted to take a look at what this game did.
Yeah.
And it started what I thought, hopefully, because I thought it was going to differentiate between hiding and sneaking, which I've never seen a game really do, or at
Mm,
least do well. Because hiding could be one thing and sneaking could be something else, and there could be parallel rules for it. Uh, but really, what we ended up with, because they try to cover everything in a very short amount of words here, is it's up to the DM.
right.
You could make a dexterity check to hide, to sneak, but for the most part, it's whatever the party and the game master agrees to is what's going to end up happening. Because it does try to say something like, I have to get to the right page here. Uh, it says like you can't hide if you can be seen, but can you sneak if you can be seen? Right? Can you sneak up on something even though you're not hiding behind cover? Uh, and it instantly then turns into a, well, we're just going to have to make it up as we go along
Yeah.
type of play,
And
which is
even,
okay. But it's just interesting that it was mentioned because it needs to be mentioned, but it really wasn't worked out in any
yeah.
way that solidifies the rules.
I didn't get to test it, but I took the invisibility spell, wondering whether, because it basically says, hey, for 10 rounds, you're invisible. And I was like, cool, what's invisible mean? Not really clear. So,
No.
okay, I'm invisible. You can't see me. Does that mean that I still need to make a dexterity check? Not clear.
Mhm.
But I could make noise, so maybe. And then we didn't get to test it to see how it would work at this particular table. But it's that kind of thing that, if you wanted to often be invisible and attack while invisible, spellcast while invisible, what does that mean for gameplay? Yeah, it's not really particularly clear here. I think that as abbreviated rules, I generally like these as general guidelines, right? That kind of idea
Mhm.
of like, you can't do it when someone's just looking at you. That's just not how it works. But what's the concept on when you're distracted or not? Well, that's all up to the GM, right?
Mhm.
You got to come up with something that says, yeah, I think you can do it in this situation, and then you go from there.
Yep. But if you are able to get up to an enemy and be undetected, then you have surprise, which means you have advantage uh, if you attack, and you get a free attack before initiative is rolled
Mm-hmm.
for the combat. So
Yeah, yeah,
that's the benefit of being something that we don't quite know how you can be.
yeah.
So then, as we started last week, we want to get into the combat section, which
Yeah,
is,
and I love the art, so
oh
like this
yeah.
is an example, right? The art here of like this giant crab attacking this adventure, right? Like this is the kind of that's what the game is selling us as an experience, which I think
Mhm.
it did pretty well during my 2 games that I've played. It felt like
Yeah.
that kind of art was coming to life.
Yep, I've never doubted the style, the art, and how all of that meshes together. And I think that's one of the strengths of this product is that it knows exactly who its target audience is. And as I said during the last segment, that this game started with a community and then became a game rather than trying to build a game and then get a community for it, which is one of its most powerful strengths. So the combat section, we start by determining surprise. Is one side aware of another? If both sides are aware of each other, there is no surprise. And if one side is unaware, then there is. So after you've determined surprise, the surpriser can take a turn before initiative is rolled if they can get to their attacker or attackee. If there is no surprise or one surprise has been adjudicated, then you make an initiative check where the highest roll goes first between the game master and all the players. And whoever gets the highest, you then start with them and move clockwise around the table. Which begs my question was, if you're playing at a table, do you specifically put the person who has the highest dex to the left of the DM, assuming that they might be the person that goes first, and then you give everyone in your party the chance to go first? Do you specifically move the person with the highest dex away from the right side of the game master so it's not, oh, you go first and now the DM gets to go second?
It, that would make, I think where that would make the most sense for me is that the D20 is such a big effect that I don't know that it's the person with the highest dex that's going to do that. But you probably want to put like the slower people towards the end of the arc so that you're not kind of bumping them up, right? Because what will happen is one player wins the roll, may or may not have the highest dex, and then from there on, you're kind of going around in a circle. And I think that's where like I mean, my character had a -3 penalty to dex. I did not go first ever.
Right.
So we were playing online, so there wasn't any table clockwise thing. We did it in order of our rolls because there was no seating position. And in that case, I was going last or next to last, every time, and that made perfect sense.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. And then what's also interesting is, you will already be in an order for exploration, and you kind of re-roll, not kind of, you re-roll initiative for combat, kind of to shake it up and change things up a bit, right? To maybe sort it slightly differently. I think that's interesting. I do like it because it has that sort of now roll for initiative feel, even though you've been in initiative. And so at first I thought, why are we rolling again? Like, well, no, but it is neat. It shakes it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't mind initiative that keeps things moving quickly. It's just I know I've played with power gamers who are going to absolutely put themselves in order from highest decks to lowest decks around the table, just to try to keep the game master from going early in a round, especially when it seems like it could be deadly. Getting attacked, right away could put you down quickly, which then takes your turn away, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the next part of combat are the turns. On your turn, you can take one action and move. The movement can be broken up by your action. And rather than having a specific distance you can move, you can just move near
which is roughly
with
30
your
feet.
move. Yeah, roughly 30 feet. So what actions can you take on your turn? We are given a list. The list includes melee attack, ranged attack, cast a spell, improvise, or multitask. The melee attack is exactly what it sounds like. You use a melee weapon, roll a d20, add your strength modifier and your talent bonus. And if you are equal to or greater than the armor class you are shooting for, you have hit and you can do damage. Ranged attack, same thing. Cast a spell. Casting a spell takes one action, and it says see spell casting on page 44, which we've already covered. And the fourth thing you can do with your action is improvise. Do an improvised action such as swinging across a ravine on a vine. The GM might determine it requires a stat check or an attack roll. I like that. I like how simply
Mhm.
it's put of just you're going to do something else. You're going to do something not expected by the rules. Great. It's an action and you just do it.
Mhm.
And then the last thing in this list is multitask. And I thought, okay, that's a multitask is going to be an action because it's co-equal with melee attack, ranged attack, cast a spell, and improvise. But it's not. Multitask says characters can do small parallel tasks on their turn, such as standing up, speaking, activating a magic item, or quaffing a potion. This does not typically use their action. And I'm like, okay, cool. So that's something else. It's not an action. And then I started thinking, so is there a limit to the number of non-action things that you can do in your
Well,
on your
and
turn? And
that's
it doesn't seem there is.
so I read this differently,
Okay.
but I agree that it's an open question. What I thought this was saying was these things individually don't usually use an action. If you do a bunch of them, then I can say that you're doing the multitask action. So drinking a potion is not an action, but if you wanted to activate a magic item and quaff a potion, then I might say
Mhm.
you're multitasking. That takes your action,
Yeah. And
right?
this is one of those points where, two people who are used to role-playing games, who have played a ton of role-playing games, who write role-playing games, can read the same thing and come to two completely
Yeah,
different things. Because my read of that is it says you can typically do any of these things without using your action. So why would you not be able to stand up, speak, and quaff a potion and still use your action?
and here's the thing that I find interesting, right? So in the example of play, which we'll get to, um, character fumbles around in my backpack and pull out a spare torch plus flint and steel. Can I light it? Makes a check, and then the next PC goes. So somehow all of that, I'm
Mhm.
guessing, was a multitask action, or maybe that's just like, I don't know, interacting with your variant somehow, or one of the other. It doesn't really seem like it's improvised, but I think that's probably what multitask is in this example of play. So you are drawing something out of your backpack, uh, and then lighting it. One of those things might have been okay. You're doing several, so that's your turn.
Yeah. And this is the joy as well as the danger of leaving things up to the DM.
Yeah,
Because when the situation is dire, you as the DM, the game master might say, "Okay, I'm going to let you pull your torch out and try to light it and also use the torch as an improvised weapon to hit because if you don't, your whole party's going to die."
right.
I'm going to let that happen. Then the next time, when it's maybe not so dire, you're like, no, you can't do that. And the players are going to say, well, I just did it last
Yeah,
time. And it becomes a point of tension, let's say. It doesn't
yeah,
have to be contentious, but it can be
yeah.
tension causing.
And that's clearly the side that this game takes, is towards
Mhm.
the side of your DM makes the call because Kelsey is a great designer, right? Kelsey
Mhm.
could have said you can do two of these things, that's a multitask, or three of these things. And I think Kelsey has, I don't want to imagine myself being her, but like has chosen not to do that, right? This is probably
Sure.
deliberate to say, you make the call. Now what we don't get is a little sidebar saying, hey, you know how consistent do you need to worry about being, or anything like that, or what we'd call
Mhm.
DM advice. Well, that isn't here, right? And that's probably okay. But maybe if you had a little space and you could do more, it would be good to have that, right? Because I think those are the kinds of things that DMs hit as they run games a lot, where they go, if I give somebody a little bit of a space here, well, then next time they want that every time, right? What do I do with
Mhm.
that?
Yeah. And that's what it comes down to for me with any game is inconsistency is fine until it's not fine.
Sure.
And you never know what that pressure point is going to be. You never know what is going to be the straw that breaks immersion, that breaks the
Yeah.
suspension of disbelief, that breaks what one person thinks of as a ruling, another person thinks of as the gospel truth.
Yeah.
And that's where the disconnect can happen. And sometimes it will never happen if you're with
Right.
the right group. Sometimes that's happens before the game even starts, as we have seen at some organized play tables where you sit down and you read the list of these are my rulings on these obscure or unclear points, uh, which
Yeah.
can also be fun for some players as you think about and debate these things, and just an absolute mood killer for others.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah,
that
it's
is a place where Kelsey does put emphasis is early on that idea of like, this is not an adversarial game, right?
right.
You are working, you are all having fun together. The goal is fun. Time is spent on that to establish
Mhm.
that, right? Because these kinds
Yeah.
of loose rulings were used back in the day by people who wanted to test your mettle and see if you were hard enough to beat my dungeon and stuff like that. And that was the worst
Yeah.
for most of us.
Yeah.
I've never enjoyed it. And you see it across editions where DMs still show up with that noise. Um,
Yeah.
this game tells you not to do that. So in theory, if there is inconsistency, well, it's inconsistency to try to make the game fun, and that
Mhm.
makes it a little better.
Sure. Next section is on damage. So when you hit a target with an attack or a spell, you damage it. You roll the weapon or the spell's damage dice and add any relevant bonuses. And that damage is subtracted from a target's hit points. You can choose to knock a creature unconscious instead of killing it if you reduce it to 0 hit points. Doesn't matter what kind of weapon, doesn't matter if it's a spell, you can just do it. And we have critical hits, where if you deal a critical hit when you roll a natural 20 on an attack roll or spellcasting check. If it's a weapon, it doubles the damage dice, as we mentioned before. And if it's a spell, you can double one of the numerical effects of that spell.
I like that you can just choose, am I killing anything? Am I not? I like that's better versus trying to say, well, but not with a spell or not with ranged attacking. Just let them do it.
Mhm.
We talked before about the numerical effects being sort of tricky for spells because a lot of them don't have that. The uh, the game can be pretty lethal, right? And one of the things that happens is you can have very low hit points. I forget how many my character had, but I had a con, I think, of 11, so I had no bonus, and I'm a little goblin, and so despite being 4 levels in, if something had hit me, not to mention that they hit me really easily with my super low armor class of like 7, I'm going down quickly, and so that capacity to be hurt is big. We could not rest in the scenario we played. And so we had these folks full of con drain. And that was one of the reasons that, when the DM was like, well, do you want to explore some additional rooms? We were not willing to take the chance for more XP because treasure equals XP. We're like, let's get out with the big treasure we got. And
Nice. Yep. After damage, we learn about terrain. The rule of difficult terrain is in effect. You can move half your normal distance through terrain that hampers your movement. You can't see a creature if you can't see a creature because it is behind something, you can't target it. Okay. This is the odd one. Attacking or casting a spell on a creature that is hiding at least half its body behind interposing terrain has disadvantage. And it uses the term hiding.
yeah,
And so my first thought was, okay, so if it's hiding, wait,
they don't mean
no,
hiding. Yeah.
it doesn't mean hiding. It just
Yeah.
means standing behind.
Mm-hmm.
So you can stand behind terrain with half your body to give you cover. Hence, WYSIWYG's taking to the sarcophagi as a shield to save him or herself from
Yeah.
danger.
I mean, it still would have hit me because of my terrible armor class, but I just luckily was not the juiciest target that were right up on it. But that's why I lived. If there'd been more creatures, I think I would have gone down.
Yeah.
I think this is all fine. I mean, that's that idea of sort of just being a little loose with it, right? If
Mhm.
you hide half your body, well, that's disadvantage. If you can't be
Yeah.
seen, can't be targeted, just trying to make it simple. You're not worrying about corners and drawing lines and stuff like that. And I think that's fine. Similarly, morale, very interesting that it's just because a lot of old games tend to have extensive systems for this. And this just simply says if enemies reduce to half their number, or half their hit points if it's a solo enemy, will flee if they fail a DC 15 wisdom check. And that's interesting because one is, this is a very simplified mechanic. So, okay, fleeing.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I thought of was sometimes I don't want to flee. I want to surrender or bargain or barter or call out for help or something else. And so it felt a little like kind of, this is just the only thing that we're covering here under morale. And I thought that was an interesting concept. What do you think?
I dislike morale checks in general and have for several editions, simply because I don't know if the morale rule is there because it's a very deadly game. So we want to give the characters every chance to survive, and having a monster run away will give them that chance. It takes away some of the agency of the game master, who, there's 20 monsters and 5 PCs. 4 PCs are unconscious. The one just happens to take out the 10th of 20 monsters. Oh, so we have to make a morale check. And why are they running when there's only one left and they've got, so that sort of thing comes into check. And I would have the monster flee if they made their wisdom saving throw, because that shows that they're smart enough to realize that they're in trouble and they should flee. So it's this thing that there are many times in this document that I'm looking at, which I love, by the way. Don't get me wrong, I love it. Where I feel like some common sense things that didn't need to be said were said, and some things that needed a rule were not included. And I would have left morale out completely, except the old school Renaissance, right? The old school games had morale. So we need to try to move them forward into the new school versions of the old school games.
I tend to think that what I would like here, and this is, I mean, another example where on the page, right, this is the smallest bit of text, right? It is this tiny corner
20
out of this
words,
page,
maybe,
which is the size of my hand, right? Like, it is so small. And so, like, you're trying to do a lot with little. And I mean, God bless, this is so good for that. What I think I would like to see is something, and I don't know how I'd write it, no idea, but really something that I could say, if I'm in doubt, then here's a thing I could roll to say, yeah, this monster is aware, it makes a decision based on where the battle is. What that decision is, well, how's it going, right? What's it make sense, right? Like in your example, maybe when you drop that 10th, they go, we've taken some hits. How about we ask for the PCs to surrender, or we say, it's been trouble for both of us. You're about to bleed out. We're probably going to murder you. But hey, I don't want to see another of my boys go down. Give me some gold and we'll let you go. Right. Just something like that. Right. That there's a turning point. If you read Keith Amon's work, like amazing work to really dissect sort of what individual monsters might do to run away, to stand and die based on their ability scores, their powers, all this interpretation. We write about it in the Forge of Foes, where we talk about running away and how to make it work because it's so hard to make it work. That's
the key, right? That's the key. It's, for me, it's not fleeing. It's not morale. That's the problem. It's how do you allow the player characters to flee if they say we're fleeing? Do you allow the monsters to do that? That's what I want from this game to tell me based on the rules that it's using. Do we just hand wave it and say, okay, you fled, or the monsters fled? No, you can't catch them. No, they're not going to come back. So you've defeated them for the purposes of this adventure.
I think this is a problem, if you were in a urban thing and an outdoor thing, like, we're out on the boat, that kind of thing, that becomes a little harder. In the typical dungeon thing where you got your torch, your limited resources, your press your luck of continuing or withdrawing, that's where I think this works a little better in that, like, for example, a game I played at Winter Fantasy had a monster flee. and many of these monsters encounters could be more than we could take on. So when this
Mhm.
monster fled, sure, we could have chased after it, but we didn't want to take more resource loss either. So
Mhm.
we were happy to let it go away, right?
Right.
And I think in Shadowdark you can have a lot of that too, where hey, that thing wants to run. We don't get XP for killing it. We get XP for
Right.
treasure. We're not
Yeah.
going to run after that thing into another room with
Mhm.
more stuff, right? So it's
Right.
probably
Right.
okay in that dungeon situation, but
Yeah.
yeah, if you're in the outdoors or a city or something, you get it with the same old D&D problems of how does fleeing even work? We
Mhm.
talked about in Forge of Foes.
There you go. And now we get to the death section, which is like not even a full column of this small book. If you fall to 0 hit points, you are unconscious and dying. If you gain 1 hit point or more, then you wake up and are no longer dying. When you fall unconscious, a death timer starts. You roll a d4 and add your con modifier with a minimum of 1. So at least a d4 plus 1. You roll it on your turn. You die in that many rounds unless you are healed or stabilized. When
Yeah.
your turn comes around on each subsequent turn while you are unconscious, you roll a d20 on a natural 20, so a 5% chance. You rise with 1 hit point.
It doesn't
Can
say if they rise with 1 hit point at the start of the turn or at the end of the turn, which is a big
Well,
deal.
it sounds like, yeah, you roll the d20 on a natural 20, you rise with 1 hit point. It doesn't say if you can take your actions.
Yeah,
It doesn't say
probably.
if you have to stand up. It doesn't
Mhm.
say any of those things. So that's something that you as the DM and the GM and the players will have to discuss.
I will say, I do love this. Like, I think that
Mhm.
actually knowing how many rounds I have is actually probably more exciting and better for
Mhm.
fast gameplay than the 3 hits, 3 losses
Mhm.
of 5e. I've never really loved it, and I have
Yeah.
trouble vocalizing but why. And I think this kind of is a bit of that answer in that even when you have 1 tick left, you might make the roll.
Right.
So people may or may not help you, even though they should. This gives you
Yeah.
that clear thing. I am dead in 2 rounds. Do
Right.
something. Like
For
if not
for
this round, next
me,
round.
for
Like,
me, D&D 5e's system works for that game
huh,
because it is less deadly. So that bit of uncertainty gives the players a certain sense of sureness that, okay,
mhm.
we'll get there. And then they roll that natural one. And, I've had more players die from that
Oh yeah,
natural one on a death save than I have from any other type of death in D&D.
yeah. Or some
Uh,
damage source that acts as 2, right? And
right.
then you're
Yeah.
oops. Yeah.
Oh, the fireball went off. Oh, our wizard cast it. Oh, but in
And there's
this,
no
like
rule here for
this,
that, which is
right?
interesting.
Yeah, this more deadly game um, can use that surety, so you know
Yeah.
exactly how long you have,
Yeah.
and there isn't an accidental, like you said, there is no rule for getting hit while you're down. It's just you are still unconscious. Um, you can stabilize a creature on your turn. Well, let me put it this way. An intelligent being can give first aid to a dying creature at close range. On a successful DC 15 intelligence check, the target stops dying but is still unconscious. So the death
Mm,
timer stops. Doesn't say if it's an action, doesn't say when you can do it. Uh,
mm,
so it is interesting in that sense that it may be very easy to stabilize someone if you don't have to do it on your turn, and there are no drawbacks to failure then, since you're not wasting an action to do it unless it is an action to do it.
yeah.
So I'm not sure.
Yeah. I'm wondering if the forget if one of the examples of play covers it. My guess is it's an action, but yeah, that's a good point. It doesn't really break it down, and if it's an action, should that be in the list of actions? And yeah.
Yeah.
What do you say, Shawn? So the next sections are Overland Travel and Downtime. Should we try to just quickly cover those and finish
Yeah,
out this gameplay section?
let's do them real quick. So with Overland Travel, it's sort of like resting. where you have a random encounter check every 1, 2, or 3 hours, depending on how dangerous the area is. How far can you travel per day? You can travel up to 8 hours per day. If you try to go longer than that, you must pass increasing con checks to push further. Although it doesn't say what happens, at least in this section, when you pass or fail those checks. The text assumes that you're going to be going on a hex-based map where hexes are 6 miles across. I assume that in later sections we will get more description of this, how to map it, what's going on there. Uh, then there's a section about light during overland travel where it says, if needed, roll a d6 times 10 for the minutes left on a light source.
Hmm.
But then we're told that there is rarely total darkness outside, even at night. So I'm having trouble reconciling. Are we switching from are we going away from the 1 hour equals 1 hour uh, real time light now? If so, why?
Yeah.
And do you actually need light while you're outside of the Shadowdark? Uh, I don't know.
Yeah, and so I guess if I try to put it together, it's sort of like, okay, we start the day and we head out across the wilderness. Time passes.
Mhm.
A thing of interest comes up. So we roll 1d6 times 10 to see how many minutes happen to be left on the light source, though we don't know how many have been expended. But yeah, if it's outside, then maybe we don't need a torch. It's, there's no dim light type thing, so I don't know that it
Right.
matters. It's a little interesting, but I guess your DM could decide, because ruling's not rules, to do things like, you're gonna have disadvantage of that because it's dim enough or something. It's an interesting question, and
Yeah.
and I guess just GMs are gonna have to find their kind of approach that they like to use there. You'd resolve the scenario and then you'd continue to go to time passes again, and so on. But yeah, it's interesting. And there's nothing kind of really prescriptive here as to how the GM should approach overland travel to make it exciting. Later we'll get tables and things like that, but there's nothing here kind of indicating how that plays out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in all of this, I'm assuming that later on we're going to get more.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there is a chart that talks about how long it takes to travel across a hex, a 6 mile hex. And it makes sense to a point because, walking takes 4 hours to get across a 6 mile hex. If you're mounted, it takes 2 hours to get across a 6 mile hex. If you're sailing, it takes 1 hour to get across a 6 mile hex. Now, if it's difficult terrain, it says it takes 2 times normal. All right, so it's going to take double the time if you're trying to go through difficult terrain. And then it talks about arduous terrain where it just says 8 hours to cross. So difficult terrain, if you're walking, would be 8 hours to cross a hex, whereas arduous terrain is also 8 hours to cross a hex. So that just confuses
Mm-hmm.
me a little bit. I don't know if I'm missing something or if I'm looking at it wrong.
My guess is this is supposed to be, what we lack here are the words that would say these are rough guidelines. And and
Mhm.
and someone might argue, well, that the book told you that's the approach to begin with. So these are all rough guidelines everywhere in the book. But yeah, it's
Right.
that kind of thing that I think you're just sort of, yeah, in this case they're the same, but they wouldn't be if you were sailing, you know.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a loose
yeah.
code.
Sure, sure. Navigation. If you are in unfamiliar terrain, you must have your navigator make an intelligence check when you exit the hex. On a failure, the group moves into a random adjacent hex. And I sort of like this, where it's very simple. I assume there's going to be something about navigation and navigator later in the book. Uh, but you fail your navigation check. You think you're going into hex Q7. You're actually
Okay.
going into R7, rolled randomly. So I sort of like that. I like the simplicity of it, and it's clear, simple, and potentially really fun. Oh, you thought you were skirting, the swamp of dread, but you are actually knee deep in the swamp of dread, thanks to your navigator.
So then we get into Downtime. And this is a
Mhm.
really interesting system. It's the kind of thing that I wouldn't have expected in a game like this. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And what we are told is you can choose a downtime activity in between adventures. Why does this exist? Well, one of the key reasons is to let you do something with all the coins you have beyond just buying gear, which eventually you've got the gear you need. So there is a downtime activity called carousing, and it lets you turn coin into XP. You put in a number of coins, and you all decide to. Everybody who's doing this says, "Okay, we're going to put in some money into a pot." Now we roll 1d8 plus a bonus that we get based on a table of how much we spent. So if as a group we spent 1,200 coin, we gain +5 to our roll. We roll the d8 plus that bonus. It tells you what you get with a nice story angle. So like 10, an angry wizard casts a deadly spell at you, while carousing, but you reflected it off of your cup. Gain 5 XP and a luck token, right? So just a little color or something like that you can use as the basis. You could gain up to XP and a treasure, or you might get an enemy, and the lowest is 2 XP, so somewhere between 2 and 6 XP. It's kind of interesting, simple system, just a couple pages, fun. What'd you think about it?
Yeah, I saw it and I was like, okay, this is Dungeon World. Dungeon World has a move
Yeah.
called carousing, and I thought is a direct reflection of that, whether accidentally or on purpose. I think it's fun. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
cool, and you can do some fun things with it. I could see, like I said, the community is the strength of this, and I could see the community coming up with hundreds of charts
Yeah.
of different things that could happen and fun adventures and side treks and stuff
Yeah.
coming from that.
And that's the thing that I think would be the most, you don't want to say, okay, you rolled a 10 again, another angry wizard did this, but use
Yeah,
it as the basis, right? And that's that kind of thing. It doesn't
sure.
super tell you these kinds of things, but that's what makes downtime fun. Um, we also get a piece on learning where you can learn a new skill. So you have to find a capable instructor willing to teach you. Nothing's really said about how that happens. You just got to find some way to do that. You can't typically learn a class's or ancestry's unique talents, but you can learn a new language or something like how to ride a sandworm using a harness. You might be able to do new actions or do an action with advantage. Work with the GM, basically. And to learn it, so you decide what you want to learn. Your GM approves it. You come up with kind of that decision. Now you make an extreme or DC 18 intelligence check to succeed. If you fail, this is nice. You can try again next downtime, right? Next time in between an adventure, and the DC lowers by 1 step. So eventually you're going to nail this, right? Even if initially it's very hard. I thought that was kind of neat.
Yeah. And then we get one more thing about gambling. So you can gamble, and it gives you a sample game called Wizards and Thieves that provides you for a way to play out a gambling scene. And it's a roll 3d6, add to the pot, winner take, this. It's cool enough. Something fun
Yeah.
you can make your own. Again, going back to the community. And the last thing we get in this section is an example of play where we have 4 players and a GM talking through a session. There's also a YouTube site for demos of gameplay, and it is helpful. I like these examples of play. Sometimes this is the first thing I go to read to see if they're being truthful with me, and if it matches the rules I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm.
But it shows how the gameplay should go, but from exploring to then going into combat.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. So that
Mhm.
closes out the gameplay section, which is, at this point, not quite half the book, but close to it. And so you might be thinking, whoa, how is that possible? Because we've covered so many topics about play. But the next part is a GM section, which
Mhm.
kind of builds on it. And we'll see that. And that GM section is deceptively large because it includes a whole bunch of tables before it gets to monsters and treasure and closes out the book.
Yep. Yep. So we will continue our look in a later episode. So with that, though, I want to thank everyone for listening. I want to thank our patrons, especially, who help us out by backing us on Patreon. Thank you so much, our Master of Dungeon supporters, our Master of Realm supporters. Thank you. You are in our show notes and in our hearts. And our Masters of the Multiverse, well, Y'all are on the air right now. Keith Ammon of The Monsters Know What They're Doing. Lou Anders of Crazy Wolf Studios. Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, Darren Chandler, Seth Eckel, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com. Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lynch, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, D Micro Ant, Sean Malley, Falcon Neal, Mike Olson, Mighty Zeus, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna, neither Teos or I can say your last names, they won't say, Trace, Joe Tyler, James Walton, Graham Ward, Xavier Wasiak, and Chris Weber. Thank you so much for your support.
I think it's
You can
Webster.
help. Oh,
And I want
what
to
did I say?
say a special thank you to Vladimir Prenner, who has been helping
Okay.
us with making our process for creating the MP3 file for the podcast faster. And it's been really awesome. So if you are interested in that, on our podcast site, we have links to where you can see that tool and use it for your podcast if you make one.
Thank you so much. And if I said Chris Weber, I meant Chris Webster. So sorry about that. You can become a patron of the show like so many others by going to patreon.com/masteringdnd and helping Teos and I update our water budget. If you get a chance, you can also leave us a review on Apple Podcast or whatever or wherever you listen to this podcast. And you can subscribe to us via YouTube. Even if you don't listen to us there, if you just click that subscribe button, it really does help us out. So, Teos, where can people find your work?
Find me at alphastream.org. From there, you can get to everything I do. Sean, where are you hiding these days?
I am on all the socials at Sean Merwin, and the podcast is on all the socials at Mastering DND. So we've gone through the game side of Shadowdark. We're about to go into the GM side. So what are we going to do now?
Well, I got to make a rogue so I can test out this hiding business and the sneak attack. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm making my next Shadowdark character. So that'll tie me up for the next 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. And you know what, Teos? I'm just straight up carousing.
Always be carousing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.